Nobody bans a car for being ugly. And in 1969, the Dodge Charger Daytona was the ugliest thing anyone in America had ever seen. A nose that stuck out 1.5 feet like a shark that got into a fight. A wing on the back so tall a grown man could walk under it without ducking. People laughed at it in dealership lots. It sat unsold. Salesmen begged their bosses to take it away. 2 years later, that car was gone from racing. Not because it was slow, because it was too fast, and NASCAR could not think of any other way to stop it. This is Speed and Style. This is the story of the Winged Warriors, and how a shape drawn by a rocket engineer broke stock car racing so completely that the sport had to write a rule just to kill it. To get why it exists, go back to 1968. Dodge is losing. Badly. Ford has figured out something Chrysler hasn't. It isn't about horsepower anymore. On the big high bank tracks, cars run flat out for miles, and at those speeds, the enemy isn't the engine, it's the air. Ford builds the Torino Talladega, Mercury builds the Cyclone spoiler. Both are slippery, both are shaped to slice. Dodge's Charger is shaped like a brick with a grill. They try a fix first. The Charger 500, flatten the grill, smooth the rear window. Worth about 5 miles an hour. It isn't enough. The Fords still walk away. And then the worst thing possible happens. Richard Petty, the king, the biggest name in the sport, gets fed up. He wants a car that can cut through air. Chrysler doesn't have one, so Petty leaves. He goes to Ford. Chrysler panics. Here's where it gets strange. Chrysler had a rocket division. Actual rockets for the US military. And when that division shut down, its engineers needed somewhere to go. One of them, a man named John Pointer, got handed a stock car and a simple question. Why is this thing slow? He looked at it the way a rocket man looks at anything. Not as a car, as an object trying to move through a fluid. And he found 2 problems. The recessed grille up front was catching air like a bucket. The tucked-in rear window was doing the same at the back. The Charger wasn't cutting through the air. It was punching a hole in it and dragging the mess behind it. So they built something no showroom in America was ready for. An 18-inch metal nose cone, pointed, replacing the grille entirely. A flat rear window, and on the back, a wing standing 23 inches tall on 2 vertical struts. Now, that wing is the part everybody argues about. There are 2 stories. Story 1 says the engineers made it that tall so it could sit up in clean air, above the turbulence rolling off the roof. Air that's been chewed up by a car body is useless. Clean air is what makes a wing work. Story 2 says they made it that tall for one dumb human reason, so the trunk could still open. Because they had to sell these things to normal people. And a car whose trunk you can't open is a car you can't sell. For 30 years, people repeated the trunk story as gospel. Then it got called an urban myth, started by a retired engineer who misremembered. Honestly, both explanations show up in serious accounts, and nobody has fully settled it. Which is perfect. The most famous wing in American racing, and we still argue about the reason it's that tall. What nobody argues about is what it did. The nose cone alone pressed roughly 1,200 pounds of downforce onto the front tires. The wing added around 600 more at the back. Call it 1,800 pounds of invisible weight, pushing the car into the ground. For free. No extra horsepower, just shape. And when you push a car down like that, something remarkable happens. Buddy Baker described it later, and it's the best line ever said about these cars. If you got a little sideways, he said, it would straighten itself out. Think about that. A 4,000-pound American brick, at nearly 200 miles an hour, correcting its own mistakes. The car debuted in September 1969 at the brand new Talladega Superspeedway, and won its first race straight out of the box. But the moment that made it immortal came the following March. Chrysler wanted the 200-mile-per-hour barrier. Nobody had done it. Not at Indy, not anywhere, not on a closed track. The whole operation cost about $4,000. Food, gas, hauling the car over. And the car they used wasn't even a hero car. It was a test mule, number 88. It had started life as a loaner for journalists. It got stolen one night in California, stripped, and left sitting on 4 milk crates. Engineering dragged it back to Michigan and rebuilt it. On March 24, 1970, Buddy Baker climbed into that resurrected car at Talladega. The engineers made one adjustment. They ran it perfectly flat instead of nose down, and found the front end generated 0 lift. His first warm-up lap was 199.8. Then he ran 200.447 miles per hour and became the first man in history to lap a closed course at over 200. Now here's where I need you to stay with me, because everything you just heard is the fun part, the engineering, the record, the glory. What comes next is the part nobody puts on a poster. It's the part where the sport looks at the greatest car ever built and decides it can't allow it to exist. If you want the stories about the machines that got erased for being too good, subscribe, because we are just getting to the erasing. Plymouth watched all of this and built their own, the Superbird. Same idea, sharper. And it worked as a bribe. Richard Petty came home from Ford 1970, belonged to the Wings. Petty won 18 races that season. Depending on how you count them, the Daytonas and Superbirds together took somewhere between 33 and 38 of the year's 48 races. That's not winning, that's occupation. And NASCAR had a problem with two faces. The first was fairness. One manufacturer had solved the sport. Everybody else was just racing for second. The second was scarier, and NASCAR was right about it. Cars were going 200 miles an hour on tires built for 180. The rubber wasn't ready. The brakes weren't ready. The safety barriers definitely weren't ready. Speed had outrun the technology holding it together, and everyone in that garage knew what happens when a tire lets go at 200 with a wall waiting. So for 1971, NASCAR wrote a rule. And it is one of the coldest things the sanctioning body has ever done. They didn't ban the winged cars. That would have caused a war. Read the rulebook, and the Daytona and the Superbird was still completely legal. There was just one condition. If you wanted to run that body shape, your engine could be no bigger than 305 cubic inches. Or, if you keep the big engine and carry so much extra weight the car would be a boat anchor. Remember, these things ran 426 Hemis. NASCAR just told them, sure, race your masterpiece with about 2/3 of the engine. Nobody had to say the word banned. One Daytona actually turned up at the 1971 Daytona 500 with a 305 in it. It was legal. It was pointless. And that was that. The Superbird lasted exactly one model year. The Daytona was already finished. Two of the most advanced machines America ever produced were killed not by a rival, not by a crash, but by a paragraph. Here's the cruelest part. The public hated them. All those wild street versions built only so the race cars could be legal. 503 Daytonas, 1,920 Superbirds sat rotting on dealer lots into 1972. Buyers thought they looked ridiculous. Some dealers gave up and cut the nose cones off, bolted regular parts on, and sold them as ordinary cars just to move them. Dealers took angle grinders to them. Today, an original Hemi Superbird can bring well over $400,000 at auction. So that's the whole life of the Winged Warriors, drawn by rocket engineers, built to drag a man back from a rival brand, first to 200 miles an hour on a closed track, dominant enough to break their own sport. Legislated into extinction inside 2 years, mutilated by the people trying to sell them, and now worth more than most houses. NASCAR never called them illegal, they just made sure that being the fastest car ever built was the one thing you weren't allowed to be.